I let it fall, my heart.
Hi, and thanks for listening today. This is Kevin Smith with the IT Transformation Institute, and this is chapter 15 in our series on world-class IT service management. Now, there are a number of processes in ITSM that are strategic. All of them are important. There's no doubt about that. And everything that we talk about in these chapters is important, and it has a place in elevating the performance of IT service management to world class. But a few of them are strategic. A few of them are essential. I would count change management in that category. I would count asset and configuration management in that category. And another of those would be release management, which is the subject of today's video. Now, release management, to be clear, is the designing, building, testing, and delivering of changed or new CIs into production. So we covered a lot of ground in that brief definition, but when we do that well, the bottom line is when we do that well, when we release changed or new CIs into production, and we do that successfully, it's a boost to the business. It's a boost to the IT organization. When we don't do that well, it is potentially very disruptive and very costly. So to look at what's required to be great at ITSM, release management is certainly one of those key things. So we'll go through an overview of this. As always, I'll provide a process diagram. And at the end of the video, I'll talk about some of the other resources that can help you. But I hope today's video is helpful and gives you some of the key points around release management.
It was dark and I was over until you kissed my lips and you saved me. My hands.
Our first discussion point today on release management is around release planning. So this is a vital part of the process. This is a vital step. And the release planning begins with scope. So we want to be thoughtful and we want to be very precise in crafting the scope of the release. And one of the things that's important to consider is getting the balance right. Certainly, by doing very little, we're reducing our risk and we're making that scope simpler. By doing too much, we're taking on more risk and we are creating complexity. We're creating additional cost. So it's important to get the balance right, and that the scope needs to represent a significant milestone for the IT organization and for the business, and it needs to represent acceptable risk, because there's always risk in a release, because again, we are delivering changes to CIs or new CIs into production for the business and into the production for the IT organization. So we need to be thoughtful and very precise and very careful in crafting that scope. And normally that's based on a decision with the IT organization, with other stakeholders, with the other processes. Now, once we've created that scope, we need to assign a team. And this is really important. We need a team of owners for the release. And release is one of those areas where we have an extended team of people that we will draw on, very talented, experienced people in the IT organization. Normally there are one or two release management owners that drive this process, but they're going to form a small cross-functional team for each release. And then that team is going to own that release from beginning to end and be responsible and accountable for ensuring that that release is successful. Now, one of the things that happens in this release planning process is evaluating risk. I mentioned that at the beginning when we're looking at scope. So we have to carefully evaluate risk. Again, there will always be risks. The key here is not making them go away. The key here is managing them effectively, communicating them to the organization. So, and by creating the right scope, assigning a team that's going to be responsible, and carefully assessing the risks and having a mitigation plan in place, then we are going to do a pretty good job of release planning.
They're strong, but my knees will fall too weak to stand in your arms without falling to your feet. But
Okay, our next discussion point is around the build and test part of release management. So this includes a few key elements. The first is that assembling our components. So these are the components that together make up the release. They need to be the right combination of components. We typically call this a package. Again, this is under the governance of the team that we put together in the release planning phase that we discussed earlier. So now that we've designed that release, we're assembling the components, we are moving forward with the release. These components are specifically designed and selected to support the scope of the release. Then I recommend using a pilot. So a pilot is a period of pre-production evaluation and testing and assessment. That pilot is intended to help mitigate our risks. It's intended to help ensure that we have the right combination of components, that we've effectively assembled our package. This pilot is also a good communication mechanism in preparing the organization for the release. The pilot phase needs to be a reasonable amount of time. It's not going to be months. It's typically days, maybe a week or two. Every organization is different, and I've seen pilots for high-risk releases run longer. They could run a month or even longer. But generally, because we need to get the release executed, there's going to be some pressure to get the release completed, of course, in managing our risks. So the pilot does need to be designed by the release team. And then finally, I like to see an integration test occur. This is going to test the integrations with all the systems that the release are going to have to work with, these new or changed CIs, the systems or other components they're going to be touching, perhaps the components that are not being updated or changed by the release. The key here is the interactions, ensuring that the interactions are going to work properly. We can't simply do testing in isolation because that's not a reflection of reality. So a good pilot process and a good integration test really significantly reduce our risk when we take the release into production.
I never knew all the things you say. They were never true in the games you play. You would
Okay, now moving forward with the release, the next phase we enter is deployment. Now, one of the things we want to watch carefully in the beginning of deployment are those risks. So we're very much aware of the risks. The team has evaluated the risks. The risks have been carefully defined. We need to watch those risk factors at the beginning once we have deployed the release. If there are going to be issues, we need to catch those very quickly, and we need to be ready to respond to those. So evaluate those risks in the hours and days following deployment. Watch those risk areas carefully, and we should already have mitigation plans in place to address those risks, and catching them sooner rather than later is critical. Also, communicate. So communications, there should be a communications plan. We didn't talk about that specifically, but there should be a communication plan in place, again, to be driven by the release team. We want to be communicating ahead of deployment. We want everybody to understand exactly what's happening. We want there to be no surprises. We don't want to disrupt IT or the business. So we want to be continuing to communicate once deployment has happened. It's a confirmation communication. It's a follow-up communication to make sure everything's working as we expect it. And then finally, there is a training plan. Another component of deployment, another component of a successful release is the training plan. Some of that training can happen, for example, in the pilot phase. It's one of the advantages of a pilot is to get some of that training to occur. So we're getting users, for example, familiar with the release. And at the same time, we're helping them. At the same time, we're helping the release team because we are evaluating risks. We are ensuring that the release is going to be received the way we expect it to be. So a combination of watching those risks and communicating effectively, communicating often, and continuing to follow through on our training plan is another important step in ensuring a successful deployment. Okay, the final element of release management that we want to highlight is support. So the deployment has occurred, we are now in production, and we are now providing support. So it's important that we get engaged immediately. And this can be part of the communication plan, is to ensure that everybody understands how the support model is going to work. And normally this is going to be accommodated by our existing support infrastructure. But there might be updates or extensions to support that are necessary, especially if this is a major release. These are significant new CIs, or these are significant changes. We need to make sure that support plan is in place. So support gets engaged immediately. We confirm that everything is working as expected. We ensure that we're on top of any issues that arise in the early stages of deployment, following deployment. The second thing that we want to do is do a deployment debrief. This is an important discipline. It's not easy to take the time to do this, but we want to do a deployment debrief where the release team convenes a cross-functional debrief and updates everybody. Because release management touches so many elements of ITSM and so many elements of IT, it's likely people are very much aware of this release happening. And again, I'll use that word discipline because it's an important organizational discipline where we do that debrief. What went well? What did not go well? What surprised us? What did we not adequately plan for? What will we do differently next time, and how will we do better next time? Because that process of improvement is continuous, and we never stop learning from releases and getting better in how we do releases. And then finally, we need to make sure that our SLAs are defined and in place. SLAs, we discuss that in our service level management chapter, but the SLAs must be in place before deployment, and the SLAs are now governing our actions every day and the expectations of all of our users. So make sure we're not trying to put those SLAs in place later. They need to be in place before we do deployment. They're in force, and they're governing our actions, and they are the metrics that we're using in support to evaluate our performance every day. Well, we covered a lot of ground today on release management. I hope it was helpful. Release management truly is one of our transformational processes for ITSM. And I'll come back to one of the fundamentals that we address time and time again in our chapters on world-class ITSM, and that is, if it is important, we need to have ownership of it. And this is a process we need to have strong ownership of. And often we are going to be deploying a team to ensure a release is successful. And so there may not be a single release management owner. It might be a couple of owners. And then those owners are managing the teams that are currently governing a release, currently driving a release, because we have several releases in the pipeline. We're going to have several teams that are in action at a given time. So that's the second part of making release management successful, is making sure we have the right resources allocated to this. This is not something we could do with just a little bit of time on the side. Release management requires focus. But the benefits are big. The benefits are successful, so it makes sense to make this investment in ownership and in the resources that will help ensure release management is a success. Now, as always, please take advantage of the resources on our website. We have the books on the Books tab, our book on world-class ITSM that goes into much more detail on release management and our other processes, as well as strategies and principles. We have our books on IT transformation, the IT imperative, and One IT, One Business books go into great detail. Those books combined are about 1,000 wonderful pages of discussion on IT transformation for those of you that just can't get enough of this stuff. Take advantage of our training. We have online training and we have in-person on-site training. Look at our trainings and consulting tab, and we have consulting offerings to help you. There are a number of those, primarily our checkup, which is a one-day engagement to assess your ITSM operation, and the roadmap workshop, which is a more detailed 2 or 3 day session where we go through exactly building a plan with you on how you can navigate this journey of moving toward world-class ITSM. Use the contact form. We'd love to hear from you. We do this for you. We love you providing us feedback on the chapters, on the videos, and new videos you'd like to see. We have a pretty extensive set of chapters now on this one, the World-Class ITSM series, and on the IT Transformation series, and we have some general IT videos as well. So I hope all those things are helpful resources to you. Look forward to meeting you. I hope at some point in the future. We know you're busy. As always, we appreciate your time. And thanks for listening, and let's make IT great.